My husband always likes a challenge. He approaches every task, no matter how difficult it is, with the mentality, I know I can do this. And then he goes for it and he almost always accomplishes it. I can't say that I always like that kind of a challenge. I sort of like going the easy route sometimes. But what I've learned about God is that when he puts a project before you, it's often challenging. And that's exactly what it was when he told me to write this study on Daniel. It has been very challenging, but very rewarding. And I've been so excited to bring this Bible study to you. Many of us know the subjects in this book and the miracles, like the deliverance from the fiery furnace and the lion's den. But there's so much more to this book, and I'm so excited for us to go further with it. So let's just jump right in. Today, we will be examining chapters 1 and 2. But before we get there, let's gain a little bit of background information. Daniel can be divided into two sections. Chapters 1 through 6 are the activities of Daniel and his friends in Babylon. And chapters 7 through 12 are various visions, dreams, and messages that Daniel received. The theme of the book is the sovereignty of God. Throughout the book, we notice how God rules over the affairs of nations and people. He will go to whatever means is necessary to accomplish his purposes and use whomever he wants to also accomplish his purposes. In Daniel, we notice that he uses pagan kings, devoted servants, horrible circumstances, and dreams and visions to accomplish his purposes. Now let's discuss the circumstances surrounding the book of Daniel. The people of God knew that their sin would and could bring about the judgment of God. Not only had God said it, but they had heard about it and they had seen it even in action before. One sin that seemed to always be prevalent with the nation of Israel was their rebellion against God. They would refuse to listen and follow his commands, and they also spent a lot of time worshiping false idols. Now, God would allow this for a time, but if they never repented of their sin, then his judgment would always strike. Jeremiah the prophet brings a message to the people of Israel. He says this in Jeremiah 25:3. For the past 23 years, from the 13th year of the reign of Josiah, son of Ammon, king of Judah, until now, the Lord has given me his messages. I have faithfully passed them on to you, but you have not listened. Here's the thing: God is always patient, but eventually his patience will wear out. Jeremiah goes on to say this in Jeremiah 25:8 through 9 and 11. And now the Lord of heaven's army says, because you have not listened to me, I will gather together all the armies of the north under King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, whom I have appointed as my deputy. I will bring them all against this land and its people. This entire land will become a desolate wasteland. Israel and her neighboring lands will serve the king of Babylon for 70 years. This was a prophetic message, and it happened exactly as God had said. In 605 BC, Nebuchadnezzar and his army did invade Jerusalem. They ransacked the city, and they carried multitudes of people back to Babylon. And this brings us to Daniel 1. But before we jump into the book, we need to examine a couple important things. First, there are two countries involved, Israel and Babylon. And these two countries couldn't have been any more different. Different culture, different lifestyle, different vision, different practices, and different religion. The people of Babylon served multiple gods, where the people of Israel only served one God. At least that was God's command. Ancient Babylon was considered the most wicked and advanced city in that day, and the peak of its power was under the ruthless king Nebuchadnezzar. Biblical prophecy depicts Babylon as a symbol of human pride and defiance against God. If we were to label Babylon today, we would probably call it, human rebellion, corruption, idolatry, and pride, everything that God hates. There are three kings that are mentioned in the first couple chapters of Daniel that are worth mentioning. At the time of the invasion, Jehoiakim was king of Judah. He was a wicked king, and he did not follow in the footsteps of his righteous father, Josiah. In fact, one time he even asked that the scroll, God's word, would be brought in and read to him. And Jeremiah 36:23 says, each time Jehudi finished reading 3 or 4 columns, the king took a knife and cut off that section of the scroll. He then threw it into the fire, section by section, until the whole scroll was burned up. He did not like what God had to say, so he burned it. I don't think that I would want that to be my claim to fame. I don't think you would either. I'm kind of thinking that he was partly responsible for Israel's rebellion. The second king was Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. He was ruthless in all of his dealings, and he was very proud. The empire was thriving under his leadership and under his rule, so he sat on the throne of his own heart. But God never gives up on him, and his story ends on a glorious note. The third king is God, king of the universe. He rules over Israel and Babylon, over nations and kings and people. We also notice in this book that he rewards and he blesses those who are faithful. It's true that he does honor those who are faithful to him. Now let's begin with the storyline in Daniel 1 and 2. Nebuchadnezzar invades Jerusalem, ransacks the city, and carries Jehoiakim and multitudes of people back to Babylon, including some of the holy things that they found in the temple of God. And eventually he has those holy things of God put in his temple to his false god, which will become part of our storyline later on in Daniel. In this siege, Nebuchadnezzar gives instructions for them to find good-looking, talented, and smart youth that they can bring back to Babylon. Now, we don't know how many were chosen, but as the story continues, there's 4 young men that stand out from the rest: Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Nebuchadnezzar was always looking to build up his empire, and it was his custom to bring hostages from the countries that he attacked in order to bring them back to Babylon and mold them into becoming Babylonian. The people are taken on a long journey, about 550 miles. It probably took about 4 months or so for them to get there. I'm guessing that many people died along the way. But after they arrive in Babylon, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are put into a 3-year regimented program. Daniel 1:5 says they were trained for 3 years and then they would enter the royal service. The goal of this school was to make these young Jewish men Babylonian. So they were taught the literature, the culture, the language of the Babylonians. It was their goal to mold these young men into becoming Babylonian. And one way that they did that was to change their Hebrew name into a Babylonian name. Daniel was renamed Belteshazzar. Hananiah was renamed Shadrach. Mishael was renamed Meshach, and Azariah was renamed Abednego. Another way that they tried to change them was by offering them food that only the king ate. No one else in Babylon ate like this. It was like going to the best restaurant that you can imagine. I'm kind of guessing that they wanted them to go, oh my goodness, wow, we never had food like that in Israel. They showered them with the best so that they would quickly be immersed in Babylonian culture and forget where they came from. But there was one problem. God had strict food rules, and the food that they were offered from the king was not in accordance with their law. It would defile their bodies. We read in Daniel 1:8, but Daniel was determined not to defile himself by eating the food and wine given to them by the king. It seemed that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego also had the same vow as well. So Daniel makes a plea to the chief eunuch, and he says to him, listen, give us vegetables and water for just 10 days, and then we'll see how it goes. Daniel 1:9 says, now God had given the chief of staff both respect and affection for Daniel. So he reluctantly agreed to do that. I mean, his life was on the line if it didn't work out. After 10 days, he comes back, and lo and behold, Daniel and his friends look healthier and stronger than all the rest. Here's the thing. God always honors faithfulness. We read in Daniel 1:17, God gave these young men an unusual aptitude for understanding in every aspect of literature and wisdom. And God gave Daniel the special ability to interpret the meanings of visions and dreams. Eventually, they went before the king, and the king too found that they were far superior than all the other wise men in Babylon. In Daniel 1:20, it says, whenever the king consulted them in any matter requiring wisdom and balanced judgment, he found them 10 times more capable than any of the magicians and enchanters in this entire kingdom. And then they were given, all four of these men were given positions of authority. They were considered some of the wise men of Babylon. Daniel then picks up the story in chapter 2 in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. It was a very disturbing dream. In fact, it was so disturbing he couldn't even sleep. But it's important to note that this dream was from God. It was sent to him from God. So Nebuchadnezzar did what he always did. He called in all the wise men of Babylon, the magicians, the sorcerers, the enchanters, the Chaldeans, all of them. And he said to them, listen, I want you to tell me the dream and then tell me its interpretation. They were stunned. How can we do that? You tell us the dream and then we'll tell you the interpretation. But Nebuchadnezzar was furious. And then his true character comes out. We read in Daniel 2:5, but the king said to the astrologers, I am serious about this. If you don't tell me what my dream was and what it means, you will be you'll be torn from limb to limb, and your houses will be turned into a heap of rubble. But they couldn't do it. No human person, no matter how smart they might be, could ever interpret a dream from God. Then the chief captain of Nebuchadnezzar's guard goes to find Daniel and his friends to have them put to death because, they're now considered part of the wise men. Why were they were there? We don't know. But he goes to their house to find them. And Daniel questions him and says, why is this matter so urgent? And then he tells him everything that had transpired. And because Daniel doesn't want to die, nor does he want anybody else to die, and he knows that he has the gift of interpreting dreams, he requests an appointment with the king. As things are being set up, Daniel does what he always does. He prays. And he asks his friends to pray. He says, please ask God for mercy and give me the interpretation, because he didn't want to die and because he knew that the right interpretation could save everybody from death. And then we read in Daniel 2:19, that night the secret was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Now he's ready to go to the king. Daniel is brought before the king, but he tells the king that he is about to give him the dream and the interpretation simply because God had given it to him. Daniel always gives credit where credit is due, and that's to God. Then he tells him the dream. You saw an image which was made up of different metals, head of gold, chest and arms of silver, middle and thighs of bronze, legs of iron, and feet of both iron and clay. And then he says, you saw a stone come and just demolish the whole thing so that there is not a trace of it left. Then Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar the meaning of this dream. It was about world empires, and most specifically, his world empire, the Babylonian Empire. In our workbook, we looked at a diagram that depicts this whole statue, and this is what it looks like. The Babylonian Empire is the head of gold. The Medo-Persian Empire is the chest and arms of silver. The Greek Empire is the middle and thighs of bronze. The Roman Empire is the legs of iron. And then there's a revived Roman Empire, which is still yet to come, is the feet partly of iron and partly of clay. And the stone is the kingdom of heaven that comes and crushes all of the empires. We're going to learn a lot more about these world empires as we move forward in the book of Daniel. But right now, this dream is really about Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian Empire that will one day fall to the Medo-Persian Empire. This is a prophetic dream. Nebuchadnezzar was proud of what he had accomplished. His empire was the greatest and biggest and strongest empire in the world. And now Daniel is telling him that his empire is going to fall one day. We can only imagine how this did not sit well with the king of Babylon. He could have had Daniel killed. I mean, he was known to have people killed because he didn't like what they had to say. But chapter 2 closes with Daniel being promoted. A theme throughout Daniel is that God's favor was always poured out on this Jewish man. That's the storyline from Daniel 1 and 2. But it would be amiss if we closed out this message without giving some practical principles from these first 2 chapters, principles that we can apply to our life. Here are 4. 1, faithfulness brings forth God's favor. Daniel and his friends fared so much better than all the other captives because they remained faithful to God. They were given positions of authority. They held great positions in Babylon. Our faithfulness brings forth God's blessing. He stretches out his hand over our families, our lives, our marriages, our ministries. He pours out his favor on those who remain faithful to him. 2, sin always has consequences. The nation of Israel suffered gravely for their sin, their rebellion against God. 70 years of captivity in Babylon. Our sin also has consequences. If we don't deal with our sin, nail it to the cross, and walk away from it, it will affect every area of our life. Our marriages, our families, our relationships, our work, etc., etc. It's so important that we deal with our sin because our sin can also be passed on down in the generational line. Something to think about for sure. 3, God is sovereign. Daniel shows us that God is sovereign not just over the nations, but over people as well. He's the one that chose a pagan king to accomplish his purposes. God is sovereign over your life as well. He has your future all mapped out. It's better that we just submit to it rather than fight it, because his plans and his purposes will prevail no matter what. And 4, standing on truth always keeps the enemy at bay. This is a truth that we see throughout Daniel. On multiple occasions, the enemy tried to take Daniel and his friends down. But because they stood firm on the law of God and they didn't waver, Satan is the one that lost. But God is the one that was glorified. Always stand firm on what the Bible has to say, even if it's uncomfortable or challenging or you're all alone. By doing this, Satan cannot gain a foothold. But more importantly, when you stand firm on the word of God and you do not waver, oh, God is so pleased. And I know I want to please God. I believe you do too. Well, we are off to a great start. Keep going because there's so much more to learn. There are great rewards awaiting those who persevere in the study of Daniel.